programs, including the California Interagency Council on Homelessness, and just really helping with that level of coordination between state departments and also filtering down across working with counties and cities, providing that advice. So I encourage you to check out our website, but I think we had a really robust conversation and to really explain things. Sometimes when we talk about policy, it's, what are you talking about? A lot of acronyms or this, but Dashika really took time to explain it. So please check out the website for more resources.
And there's the recording of it in its entirety is posted as well on the website. So I think it would be good if everybody would take the time to take a peek at it.
Definitely.
And some up that in the into the chat, and I think that would be good.
Okay. And as
just
well,
real quickly, may I say something? Thank
Sure.
you for mentioning that part about the recording. I had to disconnect early from the last meeting, but I was so disappointed that I had to, because I was really enjoying the conversation and the wealth of information. Because really my interest specifically is working to remediate the RVs based on some work that I'd done with the State Department, the HCD, which most people in most of our meetings regarding homelessness, no one really talks about that, but they are the agency that is mandated to work to regulate the RV, the RV parks. And no one works with them, which is so interesting to me. So I have actually drafted a plan targeting those. So I'll thank you for that mentioning of the recording
Sure.
of them. Go check that out.
yeah, the full recording of the meeting is on the website, and we'll drop the link into the chat. In addition, Dakshika shared a number of resources that were also sent out through the Empowerment Congress listserv to all homelessness working group members. So back to you, Dr. Adunia.
Sure, thank you. And let us know. We'll make sure we have your contact information to add you to our distribution list if you did not receive those. I'm going to move in. We kind of celebrated, I think it was the day of the last meeting, but we also want to honor again the 100th edition of Praxis. So looking at our policy update, Praxis is an amazing newsletter put together by Janice Martin. It is a nice collection of articles and thought partnership around homelessness that's happening again at different levels, mainly city and county focus, but also state initiatives that happen. So if you haven't signed up, please do put your email in the chat box and we'll make sure you get connected. But looking at the accolades from Mayor Bath and one of our supervisor Horvath and others, just congratulations to Janice and all who put that together for us. And with that, Madam Chair, if I can just move up an agenda item real quick on days of dialogue, because last time we went into our speaker and I know we wanted time for question and answer in the conversation around what was inspired. And so I don't want to cut that short. Just for those that are new, and I'm so glad we have 2 representatives from the neighborhood councils, or 3, I think. Days of Dialogue is an initiative of the Institute for Nonviolence LA. We have a special series on homelessness, and I'm going to drop in our dialogue guide into the chat. And please take a look. We want to outreach to neighborhood councils as well as our faith-based community to host these dialogues with community members. I know sometimes if you're new to dialogue, you're like, oh, why are we talking about the issue? How do we lead to action? And what we're finding is that people that participate, it's a network exchange where people are finding out about local resources in their community, finding ways to connect people that may be currently unhoused or facing housing insecurity, clarifying misinformation, and an opportunity for people to partner together toward action. So we encourage you to take a look at the guide. Please reach out if this is something you may want to host. I think we have hosted. We're about up to, I think, our 6th or 7th dialogue now. So, and we just launched last fall. I don't see Pastor on here, but we had an amazing, almost in September of last year. So we want to keep going. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Rhea, to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you so much, Dr. Orduña. It is with great pleasure that I introduce Shane Phillips. So Shane joins us from, well, one, shout out to Shane because we're both USC alumni, so fight on. And then on top of that, Shane manages the Randall Lewis Housing Initiative for UCLA's Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies. In this role, Shane does a host of amazing work, including supporting faculty and student research, managing events, publishing research and policy briefs and educational material. A lot of Shane's work focuses on topics such as tenant protections, housing production policy, government revenue, excuse me, and financing reforms. Huge shout out to Shane too, because you may know the book, but a few years ago, Shane published the book, The Affordable City: Strategies for Putting Housing Within Reach and Keeping It There. And I will let Shane tell you more about all the amazing stuff that's in the book. But along with that, Shane's going to talk to us about some strategies that he developed for improving affordability and affordability and housing stability, and is going to tell us more about the amazing work and impact that he has. So without any further ado, thank you so much for joining us, Shane.
Thanks, Freya. It will not be as laudatory of myself as you just were of me, thankfully. But I really appreciate the introduction. And I should say, I'm going to steer away from really kind of the focus of my book, because I know we're more interested in homelessness here, and that's not really the focus of my book. But what I do want to do in this conversation, or the short presentation and the conversation that follows, is draw some connections between housing policy and homelessness, which I think is often treated as two separate domains, but they're very intimately linked. And so I just want to draw out some of those connections for folks. So Rhea, I told you I did not plan to do a presentation. I realized as I was trying to give myself some structure here, it would help if I could. So I did create some slides very quickly.
Sure.
If I'm able to share those.
Yeah, let me make you a co-host.
Yeah. Always a good idea.
I could go a lot of different tangents otherwise. It's a big topic. All right, I think I got access. I'm gonna what's up. Okay. So just very quickly, so folks have a sense for what the Lewis Center is. The UCLA Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies is a research center within the Luskin School of Public Affairs. It's been around for over 30 years now. Its focus has evolved over time and kind of followed the interests of our faculty directors. But for the past 5 or 10 years, we've really been focused on equitable transportation and housing affordability and all the things that go around housing affordability. I've been here for about 4.5 years and actually started with the genesis of the housing initiative, where we wanted to really have more of a center focus on that. Some of this conversation I want to structure around a podcast series that we did. We've actually been doing a podcast where we speak to researchers about their findings across all sectors of housing policy. We have now, I think, right around 70 episodes, each one about an hour. It's a lot of content, but we kind of felt like we had a gap in homelessness where we were getting to episode 60 and we had one episode on homelessness, which just did not seem adequate for a topic like this. And so we did an 8-part series, including bringing that one from earlier into it. And so I'm going to kind of use that to structure some of this. And for folks who are interested in listening or just learning more about that series, you can go to the URL here, or you can find our podcast, UCLA Housing Voice, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anything like that. So I'm just going to kind of summarize some of my big takeaways from those 8 hours of conversations with different researchers looking at different aspects of homelessness. I frankly, I think about these issues a lot, but I learned a ton from speaking with them, and we just wrapped up the series. So I'm still processing a lot of it myself and trying to figure out what my big picture takeaways are. but just to summarize some things that really stood out to me and stuck with me. One is that homelessness is increasingly affecting people who we wouldn't think of as stereotypically at risk of homelessness. And this really came out in our episode with Margot Cushell, who ran a very large statewide survey of people experiencing homelessness in California, 3,200 adults experiencing homelessness. And they found that almost 20% of the people they surveyed were over 50 and became homeless for the first time over age 50. And this is something that I think really should, if you have a intuition that homelessness is the result of a personal failing, laziness, drug addiction, you name it, it certainly can be the case. But for so many people to get that far into their lives, never being homeless, and now suddenly for this to occur, this is not something that has always been the case. This is a new thing that is happening. And I think it really should, cause all of us to really think a little bit more about what is going on, that people who were able to, get by at the very least for so long no longer are able to. Another thing that stuck with me is that only a third of the people who reported, participated in this survey reported seeking help from any source, whether that's friends, family, or government, before becoming homeless, which again, I just think raises the question, or should cause us to question this narrative of people who are unhoused being, seeking government benefits or just looking for a handout. This is really largely people who don't have anyone to look to for help, and that's why they end up in this place in the first place. And once they're there, it still remains a real challenge for them to connect to resources. Our last three, or sorry, what would it be? Our third, fourth, and fifth episode of the series, fourth, fifth, and sixth episode of the series were really focused on specific solutions. Each of them was a discussion with a researcher who had run a randomized controlled trial on different interventions to help people who are experiencing homelessness. And a randomized controlled trial is sort of the gold standard for a research design, a way of really identifying the effect of that intervention itself and being pretty confident that it's not something else going on that you're not really able to observe that's actually causing whatever impact you're seeing. And what they found, they all looked at different populations. Our first one was looking at family homelessness. She found that reducing that housing vouchers were much more effective than rapid rehousing and traditional housing for reducing homelessness among families. Something she said in the beginning of that interview, this is with Beth Shin, that really stuck with me, was that the age at which you are most likely to experience homelessness is as an infant. And so reducing family homelessness should be a real priority. Our next researcher in that sequence studied the impact of giving unconditional lump sum cash transfers, so $7,500 to people experiencing homelessness, rather than giving them like a housing voucher or kind of a smaller amount of money on an ongoing basis. It was a one-time, here's a lump sum of money, up to you what you want to do with it. And what they found, contrary to what a lot of people who were surveyed in advance about this expected, the people who participated in this did not increase their drug or alcohol consumption relative to people who received more traditional assistance. And maybe unsurprising is that the number of days they spent homeless was very sharply reduced during that period, and their days in stable housing was very significantly increased. And finally, Housing First, for those who aren't familiar, I won't get into a lot of detail here, but this is just an approach to bringing people into housing that essentially says, we are going to first get you into the home. And if you have problems like drug addiction, mental illness, what have you, we're going to help you solve those problems after you're in the house, rather than expecting you to solve those challenges while experiencing homelessness, which we know from experience people really struggle to do. And again, they found that this solution was dramatically more effective at reducing homelessness and at improving quality of life for the people who received that treatment. And for all of these interventions, my real takeaway was just that none of these solutions worked for every single person. There was always some group of people, it might be 10%, it might be 30%, who it just didn't work for. But for the majority, in all of these cases, the sort of preferred solution helped them very dramatically. And I think that, should put the onus on us to some extent to find out how to better target the interventions that we do have available to us to make sure that people are getting the help that they need, because we know that for just about everyone, if they do get the help that they really need, that really will work for them, we can help them back out of homelessness, and often for a long time or permanently. Our second to last episode, which is the last kind of research-based interview, was with two folks from the Department of Veterans Affairs. And we wanted to talk to them because the VA, through a very committed, holistic, very significant investment approach to reducing veteran homelessness, they cut the number by more than half from 2009 to 2023. And this was over a time period where overall homelessness nationally was essentially flat. We're pretty much right where we were in 2009 today in terms of overall homelessness, but you can see in this chart we're at less than half the number in terms of veterans. And so this for me was really just like a hopeful message that when we commit the resources, when we have a holistic approach that is not just about homelessness, but about health, about work, about connecting to your family, all these things, you really can see significant improvement. And the last thing I'll say about the interviews that we did was actually from our first interview. And this was with Greg Colburn, author of Homelessness is a Housing Problem, a book that came out just a couple of years ago. And the real, main message of his book is that if you want to know, or if you want to predict a place that will have high rates of homelessness, like LA does, you don't look at the weather, you don't look at poverty rates, you don't look at rates of mental illness or drug addiction or abuse. You don't look at the generosity of the public programs. The things that predict high rates of homelessness are high rents and low rental vacancies. And I think it's really important to be clear. This does not mean that individual behaviors and risk factors don't matter. They certainly do. But it does mean that the same risk factors are much more likely to lead to homelessness in a place like Los Angeles than in a place like Kansas City or Chicago or Miami or wherever. And that is something that I think is really, really not fully appreciated yet, but is increasingly appreciated. And I think that's a really important observation. And it's not meant to replace the kind of individual focused, the direct intervention that we need to help individual people. It's recognizing that there's a wider system that we're all kind of a part of as well. And I'll get more into that. So just to kind of drill into this a little bit, in Los Angeles County, this is from the 2023 Los Angeles homelessness count, we are clearly helping more people out of homelessness than we ever have before. This is just the number of people the number of housing placements each year. And compared to 2017, we're at almost, this is about 50% higher. We're doing a very good job with the additional resources that have been invested over this time period to help more people out of homelessness. The challenge is that the number of people becoming homeless is growing even faster. And that's where these housing market factors really come into play. So, a message that I often share and I think is kind of a growing chorus is that an effective homelessness reduction strategy definitely has to focus on getting people back into housing. Clearly, that's the outflow from homelessness, but we also need to pay a lot more attention to the inflow into homelessness. And that requires making housing more affordable. coming back to the homelessness as a housing problem message. And it's not just for a specific subset of units, but really we have to make the entire housing market more affordable. But, and I just have a few more slides here, building affordable, which means subsidized housing at the end of the day, while it's important, it is absolutely not enough. At a cost of, we're now around or above $600,000 per unit or more to build subsidized housing that is rented by low-income households, formerly unhoused people, and so on. At that cost, we will just never build enough subsidized housing for everyone who needs it. I could go through the math, but I think just at those numbers, it's pretty clear why that's the case. We're also going to need to rely on the market to build a lot of the housing. And, that means building without subsidies. So we can get a lot of this housing without subsidies, but at the same time, because it doesn't have subsidies, it will be at higher rents. And I just want to step back here and make clear, my message here is not that the market will save us. It is really recognizing the complementary nature of affordable and market rate housing. And I have a tendency in my interest in housing policy and really kind of policy in general to run toward the controversy. And I think this is an area where there's a lot of controversy. Some people think market rate housing is the problem, but I think the research is pretty clear on net that it is part of, though certainly not all of the solution. So I think this is my last slide just to kind of summarize why this is the case. And then I really just want to get into more of a conversation and Q&A because I'm sure people want to dig into this further. But what we see with market rate housing, this is housing that's built without subsidies that, a new 1-bedroom apartment might rent for $2,500 a month. A new 2-bedroom might rent for $3,500 a month. These are very expensive units, not affordable to most people. Again, they don't require subsidies, so we're not paying anything for it, but it's understandable why someone would see a building with units like that and think, how could this possibly be helping the affordability crisis, much less the homelessness crisis? And the answer, through a lot of great research that's been going on the last few years in the US and elsewhere, is that when those units open, yes, the person who moves into that unit is going to be relatively high income, a privileged person who doesn't need our support, really, financially or otherwise. But most of the time, they are moving from another home in this same area, same neighborhood, same metro area at the very least, and they're leaving that other unit vacant. And this chart is really just showing that when that new unit is built, it triggers a series of moves, voluntary moves, that by the 5th round, so, someone moves into the market rate unit, they leave behind their old unit, someone moves into that one, which is a little more affordable than the market rate unit that the first person moved into, and so on down the line. Suddenly, a $2,500 unit that opened up in downtown is creating a vacant $1,200 a month unit in South LA or in Palms or what have you. And by the time you get to the 5th round in this cycle, more than half of the people who are moving into a unit that's been opened up through this chain are actually below the median income, and 30% of them are actually below the 20th percentile. They're among the poorest 5th of people in their community. So there's a real benefit here, indirect, insufficient, not enough, not the only thing we need to do, but complementary to the construction of affordable housing and the subsidies and housing vouchers and everything else. And I bring that up because it is difficult to convince people of and not straightforward. But I think that is the kind of conversation that folks here, I hope, and I think people all around are more and more ready to have, just this recognition that affordable housing is not enough, shelters are not enough, housing vouchers are not enough. There is not one thing that is ever going to be enough. We really need to identify everything that is going to help with this problem. And this is really one of those things, and a very big a very impactful one of them. So I will stop there, and happy to, answer questions, but also if we can, make it more of a conversation, I'd love that too. Thank you.
Shane, thank you so much. There was a lot of information there, and I'm sure all of our wheels are turning. So thank you for the presentation. I would like to have our first question be from Supervisor MRT. So Supervisor?
Thank you very much, Shane. I think it's fair to say that your presentation is sufficiently provocative, and that will manifest itself in the conversation that will take place tonight. But I think we shouldn't be afraid of conversations where there may be varying points of view. That is the business of policymaking itself. And I think, once again, the Empowerment Congress, the Homeless Working Group, is all about that. I mean, our message is to educate, engage, and empower. And I think this is the essence of what's happening tonight. Let me offer these couple of observations. One, it could be argued that we could take a position of housing first, but never do we take the position of a housing only. The insights of those who are aiding in the effort to arrest the homeless crisis, who come from the mental health sector, make it abundantly clear, absent services for those who are housed, we have not accomplished that which is necessary. And so, from my point of view and my advocacy, my policy making has been to make sure that we are coupling the housing conversation with the services conversation. One or the other really doesn't help us address the homeless crisis. I'd like your viewpoints on there, and then I'll close with the point that it seems to me that from a housing perspective, a robust discussion about inclusionary zoning is critically important. Critically important, and we should not relent until we have that as a part of this conversation in real time and in real form. I'd like your feedback on those couple of observations.
Yeah, I 100% agree, especially on the observation about housing first and services. And I think both Margot Kuchel and Beth Shin has had exactly the same thing to say. It's not housing only, it's housing first. And interestingly, the model that is best tested, and the conversation we had about housing first, was a very large randomized controlled trial studying the model in Canada, in 5 different cities, in different kind of variations. And actually, it was very effective, but their model was not the model we see here in Los Angeles. And that was surprising to me. Our model, I think generally we've committed to services, but we're very wedded to, and I think there's probably many reasons for this, but the model in Canada was basically community services. People would receive, basically they just get vouchers to move into market housing, and they would go to community clinics and things like that. They wouldn't really have on-site services for the most part. And the researcher in Canada observed, and I observed, that our model here is very much, an entire building is for formerly unhoused people. And he said their kind of threshold was, we don't really want over 20% because it starts to cause problems. And that, his message was not that our model does not work. It's that we actually haven't studied it in the same way we've studied the other model. And so I think, for one, it's just worth studying, but it's also, I think we should maybe be trying a little more of that more community-based model. But I think here, in the US, as they did in Canada as well, but I think we're still a little behind in this regard. I think we still have this sense that if someone is homeless, especially if they're chronically homeless, if they're, have a severe mental illness that's tied to that, then we, even in the kind of professional homelessness sphere, still see them as not being able to care for themselves and needing to be kind of surrounded with services in a way that is absolutely necessary for some people. But I think we could do with a little more faith and trust in people, and kind of letting things, seeing where things go, and monitoring, but not being so, paternalistic in that way. On inclusionary zoning, this is one where, I wrote my book and I was kind of ambivalent about inclusionary zoning.
Yeah.
Frankly, I am increasingly anti-inclusionary zoning, even though I'm increasingly pro rent stabilization and eviction protections and other things. I don't know if we want to get into really in the weeds on why that is. I think I will just say that I think it is a little bit of a dead end in that it certainly reduces or increases costs overall, and maybe that leads to a little bit less housing overall. But really, I think the bigger issue is just sometimes it can become an excuse to not invest the resources we need. And I don't think we'll ever have anywhere close to the amount of resources we need, or the amount of affordable housing that we will need, if we're relying primarily on the private sector to provide that through a profit-oriented motive. I think the only way to get housing that is affordable, which means it's losing money, is to spend a lot of money on it in public subsidies at the local level, but also state and federal. And it's not that these things need to be in competition, but I really think we can't lose sight of the need to just spend money if we really want to, address this at the scale necessary.
Madam Co-Chairs, I appreciate the presenters' observations, and I do not wish to dominate the discussion. I will simply offer the following. Inclusionary zoning is, in my mind, to be thought of as a strategy that provides sufficient incentives for the private sector to get into the business of housing production, where they do see profit as more reasonable as a piece of how we get more production in play. I'm not thinking about it abstractly. I'm thinking about it concretely as to how do we get housing built. The nonprofit sector is incapable in terms of capacity to do the job that needs to be done. And so we need to figure out how we get other players in the mix. And I mean private sector players. And that's part of the conversation that I'm thinking about in terms of inclusionary zoning. I did share with the co-chairs an article that just came up on LAist that housing is taking such a large bite out of the resources of households until it is compromising the health of the residents in those households. And so Rhea or Alyssa, if you could, Elisa, if you could share that in the chat, it would be useful. I won't take up more time. Shane, it seems to me you and I need to spend a little bit more time together so I can get you straightened out.
Happy to. Well, let's leave it here. I think it's good to end on agreement, and I think the kind of incentive-based model of inclusionary zoning that you're referring to has really been the emphasis in Los Angeles, the city, over the past, especially since the TOC program starting in 2017, and now the state density bonus being expanded statewide and improved upon, I think is really building on that. And I think while I still have some reservations, I do think relative to where we were before, it's a step forward in every respect. So, yes.
Yes, and one size does not fit all. And I think that's what we have to appreciate about the whole discussion about homelessness. Thank you, Shane. Madam Co-Chairs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor, and thank you, Shane, as well. Supervisor, I think if you have more questions, we're always here for it. Thank you.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any questions for Shane?
Denise had one in the chat. If you want to read it, Maria.
Okay. And we also just put the LAist article that Supervisor was referring to into the chat. Denise had a question on how can one direct people who are homeless to retrieve a voucher? Is that the one you're referring to, Lisa?
May I speak?
Sure. Yes, Denise, go for it.
Okay. A lot of people here in the communities, a lot of single mothers, they're having a hard time. Let's say they and their boyfriend were living together, they broke up, and so they have the children, and instead of them like being on the street, they move into one of these transitional housing, and they charge them like $600 a week. You know, they work and they can't get out in just for a room, but they need a voucher. They need furniture. They need they need help getting into a place. And it seems like what's going on now, you only want to help the people that are sleeping on the street. And if this single mother lose her job, her and her children will be on the streets in the car, but all of the money is going into this transitional home where they're charging people $600 a week to live there, and they need help. How can I help individuals in this community and at our church that are stuck and that are in the dilemma, and help the mothers get furniture and everything they need to move into a place? And also, some of the mothers, they need training to get a job.
Mm-hmm. So,
Dr. Orduña, I feel like this is a question you are very well suited to answer based on your experience. Better than me.
Thank you. And thank you, Denise, and happy to follow up. There are, to my knowledge, still some homeless prevention dollars that they may qualify for families that or households that aren't experienced kind of street homelessness. And I was just trying to do a quick search real quick on LAHSA or HOPIC's website. The furniture moving in, again, it's all about connecting people either to the coordinated entry system or to case management services. But there are some faith-based and other funds that are available to help with furniture. So I will look up those as well. But it's probably going to be through the service provider.
When you say service provider, for instance, I have here at my church, my pastor is very kind, and he gives people money out of his own pocket and to go to hotels and stay there. And then he said, well, just come to the church because it's expensive. The hotels have gone up because they know that the city is giving vouchers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they've gone up ridiculous. And we're trying to get these people out the church. You know, I mean, he's like, Denise, do something, get some kind of resources for us. You know, we need help.
Where are you located in South LA, Miss Denise?
Yes, we're at 11250 South Avalon Boulevard.
Okay. Have you ever worked with HOPIC's organization before?
No, I work for Compton Unified School District, and I'm a substitute program manager for another school district. And I'm one of the ministers there. But I never work with HOPICs. I have numbers to LAHSA, Housing Right Center, but these are all places for people that are sleeping on the streets or in a car. And I don't want to lie, you know, because I am a minister and say, well, you have to say this or you have to say that. These single mothers and these people, they need help. And we're trying to kick them out of our church, but you know, we can't just kick them out on the street.
No, I'm gonna private message you my contact information and happy to
Okay.
Excuse me,
Okay,
may
I'll
I
call you
speak?
tomorrow.
and I guess
May I speak?
who
Yes.
who
This
is
is
that,
Carmen
please?
Taylor Jones.
Okay.
You know, Shane, you said something that was quite that resonated with me, and that was the aging. One of the things that we know and have seen for several cycles of the homeless count were a large majority of the homeless were 50 years old and above,
Yes.
single people. And so when I did the first homeless count for SPA 6, for LA County, LA City, we were still in the single digits of $1 million budget. I am still flabbergasted at the fact that last year, 2023, just for Los Angeles City alone, the budget for homelessness was $1.6 billion. So during the month of February, I am currently not working, but during the month of February, just because I live in Willowbrook, and just seeing just this large number of homeless men and women, predominantly African-American, living in the underpass, the 105 between Wilmington and Central Avenue. I put together a small team of people. And just for the month of February, we served over 350 hot meals. This was self-funded and self-initiated. Even when I tried to connect with Hopics, although they did send a team out because I was trying like hell and high water to just get them some hot showers. And it was amazing. It's like, okay, so all the pieces are there. And it seemed like it only requires just a little bit of work, just a phone call. But I'm telling you, we never got it done. We actually had to have Hopics come out. They'd sent 2 resource vans out, and we had to transport people over to WOCAC so that they could take a hot shower. But all these monies and all this personnel, and it is harder than ever to get anything done on the ground. And it seems like the more funding that comes into this tragedy of homelessness, the less work that's being done. And that's, I'm only saying that because I've been at the table for a number of years, and I've said it at the top, and now I'm really just boots to the ground. And a lot of the men that we encountered last month have been in the HMI system since it was created back in 2013. So these men and women have been navigating on the street for over 10 years, and they have truly given up, and they have resigned themselves to living out their life and their death there on the street. And it is just really sad when I'm looking at the meeting, at the large pockets of money and all of the personnel that we got, that we can't, even on the street, all of these large encampments of just piles and piles of trash that
Okay.
have, on the street for months. We can't
But
do
Carmen,
nothing about that.
Yes, but let me offer this. The issue of homelessness is not static. It is very dynamic. Right now, I sit in the organization called Peace Over Violence. Their work is substantially aimed at violence against women. They give the data that 40% of those who are experiencing homelessness, particularly women, are there as a result of domestic violence. That's a phenomenon that has evolved. When we talked about homelessness 20 years ago, such was not the case. 10 years ago, we were talking about meth and the crisis that drove mortality in homelessness. Now is fentanyl. I just cite those 3 examples. This is a moving target. And prescriptively speaking, it requires a range of methodologies that have to be tested and proven effective. I saw in the track in the chat, someone said the COVID crisis impacted it as well. And so the fact of the matter is we don't have sufficient funds. What do I mean by that? Shane made the point that the inflow language that's relatively new over the last 15 years is outstripping our ability to take people out of homelessness, which is significant. Over 200 plus persons every day in the county of Los Angeles, only to have more than 225 roughly fall into homelessness, as we heard from the presentation made by Dakshika Rekrima last 2 weeks ago. And so this is hugely complicated. But that's no excuse for us not to lean in. We have to have better collaboration with the faith community, better collaboration with the public sector, that is the city and the county, the state and the feds. We have to get the private sector in the mix in a way that it hasn't been. That's what's required. That's why this is so hard. We have a mayor in the city of Los Angeles who has lifted harder than any other of her predecessors, and it will take that plus more. So I hear you. But we have these conversations. Why? Because we need to learn more and do more. And I'm pleased that you have taken the time to give your insights. But that's what it's about. And we need to just keep swinging. We have to. Madam Chairs.
I think that's an excellent point, Supervisor, and thank you for sharing that. And Carmen, thank you for your questions as well. I think Byron, you had your hand up. Do you have questions for Shane and how it relates to affordability in his presentation?
Yes, thank you so much. I wanted to, first of all, just thank you, Rhea, and the other co-chair for doing such a wonderful job with this meeting. And I want to just share and ask Shane the question about inclusionary zoning, because I looked at the homeless situation, especially around the public housing in Chicago, and how that really turned into a disaster as far as sustainability, longevity, and inclusivity with progressive change. And then when they tore down the housing complexes there in Chicago, that sent a lot of people from the community into communities that they weren't really equipped to deal with. And so from a financial standpoint, a mental health standpoint, and just from a job employment standpoint. And so I wanted to just kind of ask Shane to, if you could elaborate a little bit on your hesitancy around inclusivity when it comes to zoning, because I think it's going to be a collaboration of market rating, faith community, housing vouchers, business planning and policy making that's going to help really sustain and move this homeless crisis forward, if you will. But I just want to hear a little bit more, if you will, Shane, about your, I don't know if it's a resistance or just not the supportive sense of inclusivity around zoning.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And at the Lewis Center, myself and several of our faculty and some partners at Berkeley and elsewhere have been working on the housing element process here in California, and specifically the implementation and the follow-up and accountability around the affirmatively furthering fair housing provisions of state law, and which actually started with federal law. So you may be familiar with this provision of the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which did two things, but really only did one thing at the time. The thing it did that actually saw a lot of success, didn't go, has not fully succeeded, but did make a lot of progress, was the anti-discrimination provisions of the Fair Housing Act. Again, discrimination in housing markets has not gone away, but it has substantially improved. The other provision, major provision of the Fair Housing Act, was to affirmatively further fair housing. It was this recognition that it was not enough after centuries of redlining and, like outright theft and racial covenants and all the rest to say, okay, those things are all gone now. We're on equal footing, right? The segregated communities that were created would not be undone by simply removing those impediments. You had to affirmatively act, you had to proactively act to undo that segregation and to foster inclusive communities. And so I raise all of that partly just to say that this is something that I really care about and that we're working a lot on, and we're working in particular to really try to bring more housing and more housing options, affordable and market rate, but also multifamily and single family, into higher income communities, historically exclusionary communities that are overwhelmingly white in, cities that are overwhelmingly not. And so I think the use of the phrase inclusionary zoning, I think, implies that it is the opposite of exclusionary zoning, but exclusionary zoning is ultimately zoning that says you can't build certain kinds of housing in generally in higher income and disproportionately white neighborhoods. And so the opposite of that would be allowing that housing to be built. Inclusionary zoning is a good name, but it is not the opposite. And in some ways, by requiring some of the units to be affordable, it is making it harder to build in these neighborhoods. So when something does get built, there are going to be 10%, 15% of the units that are reserved for low-income households, but you might get less housing overall. And so it's sort of a question of, are you getting 50% of something or 15% of something or 100% of nothing? And so, I don't need to beat that drum or beat that horse any further. I think my challenge is just, because it increases costs, because it's reducing production, there is a cost that we're not really grappling with. When you have inclusionary zoning requirements, you are getting some below market units, and that is really important. And it's a very immediate benefit, and it's a very focused benefit. The people who benefit from it really feel it. On the other hand, it is very likely that it is, by suppressing the supply of housing overall, raising everyone else's rents and home values just a little bit faster than they otherwise would be. And so there's a very diffuse cost to it. And really, I think Supervisor Ridley Thomas made a very good point that the design of these policies really matters. And I think when they are incentive-based, when there's offsetting density and height and things that can compensate for that cost, it really can be a win-win in the near term. And so, I guess my point is not that it's always bad, inherently bad, and there are benefits like having affordable units, not just concentrated all in one building in a community, but spread out among many buildings within a community. So there are real benefits. I didn't mean to poke the hornet's nest by expressing a little bit of reservation about inclusionary zoning, but I just think there are costs and benefits, and we don't always talk as openly as I wish we would about the costs.
And if I could, one more point is because we were working with affordable housing in Pasadena, and the word affordable housing didn't necessarily mean affordable housing for those who need it. And so this is one of my points when it comes to inclusionary zoning, is that when we talk about affordable housing, who are we saying it's affordable to? And a lot of times it's excluding those who we intend to make a difference for. And this is why I'm asking the question to you.
Yeah. Well, I think that is another really good point. And something I've been thinking about a lot lately is when you have a mission-driven affordable housing developer who, they have to run a lottery, for example, to decide who moves into the units. If you are a kind of typical unsubsidized developer who is required to provide affordable units through inclusionary zoning, you get to pick your tenants. Their income has to be verified by the city, but I think it is fair to assume that they are not picking the people with the greatest need, even among the people within the income bands that they are legally obligated to serve. And so I think that's kind of a not the most important aspect of this, but I think having profit-driven entities doing this work to serve the people who have the greatest needs is probably not the most effective approach. But again, I don't think this is necessarily, I really do like to emphasize that this does not need to be an either or. And as I said earlier, we need to do a lot of different things. And I think there is room to make this work alongside other things. It's just, we really need to invest the resources more than anything else and have people who are really, it is their job, first and foremost, to serve the people who need this assistance the most. But
Thank you.
I really appreciate those comments and questions.
Thank you, Bishop Byron, for your question. Shane, thank you for your response as well. I think it's really amazing to be able to hear various perspectives, and it helps us hopefully develop a holistic solution, from all sides. So Shane, I want to make sure that we don't keep you for too long. Do you have time for 2 more questions?
Sure.
We don't want to cut too much into your time. Thank you for sharing the time you have shared. So with that, we're going to take 2 more questions, and it's going to be Tara and then Velvet. So Tara, did you have a question for Shane?
Hi, yes, thank you. I had a question, Shane. You mentioned about not affordability, but a lot of people's homelessness due to their own personal problems and things like that. I think you should also include lack of generational wealth. That definitely impacts a lot of people and their ability to have continuous housing. I don't know if you want to research that a little more. Also, Supervisor Thomas, you mentioned the different issues as to what is fueling people into homelessness. I think a lot of the issues with being able to not only fulfill the need is the barriers to access to the housing programs. It's a long wait. It takes so long. So regardless if it's people, who are homeless because of meth or because of crack or because of domestic violence, there needs to be an intake process that can expedite people's placement. A lot of the waiting is what definitely contributes to a lot of folks still being homeless. I also agree with the young lady who mentioned earlier, single mothers having to actually live on the street in order to be considered for priority housing. There should be some type of preventative measures that keep single women from even entering the streets with their children, or, even if they're experiencing domestic violence or just housing insecurity. A lot of us here in this city are experiencing housing insecurity because the median income doesn't match up to what the housing market is. There has to be some type of closing of either the income gap or there has to be more vouchers available for people to have access. There's just way too many barriers to access the affordable housing that's being built or the proposed projects. Like, I'm seeing a lot of stuff being built. It's great, but there's still a 10-year wait list for Section 8 or other housing programs. So there's going to have to be some type of easy way to remove the barriers for people to be able to access these programs.
Just a quick response. I just want to underline the point about generational wealth. And, I hope nothing I said is taken as implying that that's not a part of this. There are many individual risk factors. That is one of them, and that is sort of downstream of systemic racism generally, and just the history of this country. The point I was trying to make was not that any of these things don't matter. They all matter. They matter greatly at the individual level. The point is really that the lack of generational wealth, being someone who lacks generational wealth in Los Angeles is much more likely to lead to homelessness because of high housing costs and low rental vacancy rates than having that same lack of generational wealth in other more affordable communities. You're much more likely to become homeless if something bad happens to you, if the cheapest available rent is $1,500 a month, than if it's $400 or $600 as it is in many communities across the country.
True. Thank you. Thank you for acknowledging that. No, I just wanted to uplift that because I think people, when we see the fight for reparations and we see that Black people are fighting to have access to generational wealth that was stolen from us, it's not a coincidence that the majority of the people who are homeless in Los Angeles are African American,
No,
right?
absolutely.
So
yeah.
I just want to remind people, a lot of people who don't have, or who don't have housing insecurity, they also have a safety net that a lot of us do not have, and that definitely a lot of us cannot afford a $200 emergency. So COVID and other issues that definitely have exacerbated that is definitely contributing to the increase of homelessness. So I just wanted to uplift that. Thank you for acknowledging.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
And thank
you.
you for your work.
And for our last question, Velvet, did you have a question for Shane?
Well, I just wanted to say that I'm glad I had the opportunity to join tonight. And I'm glad we're talking about all of the issues, because it's not just one issue, it's a million issues that are causing people to be intense. And I ended up leaving Los Angeles because, I kept finding myself in the same position over and over again. And when you guys talk about people, or they say, oh, people are on drugs, or they don't want housing. People are in Newport Beach using cocaine every night. It ain't the drug, it's the cost of the housing and the fact that the landlords don't want to fix their properties, and they'd rather you move. They'd rather you move than fix their properties, because when you move, they can raise the rent. So we need to figure out how we can stop the slumlords and the people who are buying our properties and not, giving people a safe place to live. I've lived in places like, I moved to Orange County last year from LA. I'm thinking I got away. And I had the same thing that happened in LA. I'm in Little Rock, Arkansas, the same situation. So it's not just LA. I mean, it's one place, I think it's Benton in Arkansas. One company bought all of the housing, like 4 different properties that probably had 100 buildings each one. And all of them are under disrepair. And they walking around with code enforcement. We got to start enforcing the code, getting the money. When they don't fix their properties, we need to either seize them, fine them, bring more money in, and stop, driving by. Everybody needs to stop talking about it and stop driving by and do something. Write your Congress, do whatever you think you can do. But I think that so many people before COVID didn't care. They drive by and see the homeless people. And now after COVID, it's exacerbated. And now people want to talk. But I've been singing the same note for since 2012. And I literally I even moved out of LA because for some reason, when Garcetti became mayor, I knew it was going to get worse. And then I went to an event at his mansion, and his wife said, oh, the rent's going to raise to $2,400. So I think this all was planned. And I want to know, and I want them to figure out, why are they not enforcing the code? We can stop a lot of homelessness. All they got to do is start finding all them doggone landlords. And that's all I'm going to say. And I'm glad I'm here. It was a great meeting. Everybody's perspective is valuable. And I'm glad to be here. And thank you guys for continuing to fight for safe and affordable housing.
Thank you, Velvet. Thank you for what you shared. And I think a lot of it relates to what Shane shared and noted about affordability as well. So with that, Shane, we'd like to say thank you so much for joining us, for lending your expertise, for the conversation and the discussion and the questions that you answered, and for the work that you do. So I'd like to give a huge applause to Shane. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much
Thanks.
for the welcome and the opportunity. And it was great chatting with everyone, and feel free to stay in touch. I'm easy to find. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you, Shane. Thank
Bye.
you. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Dr. Orduña.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. I know we're maybe a little bit over time. Thank you to our guest speaker. Please remember, if you're interested in Days of Dialogue, please reach out, particularly those that are a part of our neighborhood council. We would love to keep this conversation going and bring it to the community level. And we will see you in, I think, 2 weeks, Rhea? Okay, I forgot our guest speaker. I have to remember, so we'll make sure we send that out. But we'll have another guest speaker. And again, thank you all just for your contribution and your different perspectives. This is a complicated issue and no one can solve it by themselves. So thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.